Have you ever been pulled over for no reason? When this driver was stopped, he was put in an odd circumstance for having an expired registration, only to discover that the police officer had stopped his own vehicle. What came next? You'll be shocked. It began as any other traffic jam. Put an end to it. It's a peaceful suburban road in broad daylight. A stylish black car approaches. The flashing lights impacted the rearview mirror, causing a quiet stop. The driver, a black man in his 30s with nice clothes, signals, stops, and maintains eye contact with both hands. He has previously done this. No careless driving, no speeding, just a composed man going about his day. However, the something seems strange as soon as the cop exits the cruiser. He doesn't ask any questions. He approaches us though he is certain of his culpability. The air is slashed like a razor by his voice. Get out of the car, the registration has expired. The calm but obviously perplexed motorist replies, Sir, I just bought this car last month. The tags are up to date. Calmly and methodically he goes forth. Officer's hand strays toward his holster, but the envelope is in the glove box. Hands where I can see them, he loses it. People on dog walks start to look over, a nearby peek via a window. The man becomes motionless. What ought to have taken 90 seconds wrote at Cinto 9 humiliating minutes. He is instructed to touch the hood with his hands. The policeman circles around. Doesn't look like this belongs to you. And these luxury models don't usually get along. Wind up in your hands? The driver doesn't protest. He is more knowledgeable. Heat. He simply stands there, heat rising beneath his skin, rising off the concrete. Next, as soon as the officer runs, Theplate. His face has a spark of astonishment and a beat. He radios once more, verifies the veng. He stiffens abruptly since the car isn't merely formally registered. It is registered under his full name, his former name, and his own name, his address, and badge number. The motorist observes the blood dripping from the officer's face since what began as racial profiling simply evolved into something far more bizarre. Very seriously. This goes beyond a simple, erroneous traffic stop. It is a tale of erroneous detention, misuse of authority, and police misbehavior. It's on the verge of going viral. This is not your typical drama from a dash cam, identity confusion, civil rights violations, and a startling turn of events that even internal affairs failed to recognize approaching. Later, body cam footage will show it all. But right now, as I stand by the side of the road, everything the two men are in a profound silence. One of them stunned and the other motionless. Concealing the truth. Because this driver wasn't just any driver, as the cop is unaware. He was observing, waiting, and researching. And the test was this. His name was Julian Mercer, a mentor at a local STEM school, senior systems engineer, and lecturer on digital ethics at Atlanta Center. Julian wasn't only successful at 34, he was careful. That type of man who carries scanned copies of his vehicle's paperwork in the car and double-checks the tire pressure aloud and says, yes, sir, to each cop. He was aware of the game even though his pulse was racing. Remain composed, remain courteous, and alive, particularly in an area where the incorrect tone, expression, or attire could get you classified as a danger. The 2020 Audi car in question was midnight black, a 6 with leather seats and tinted windows. Amazing, but not absurd. 2 months prior, Julian had won it in a government auction. He had conducted the investigation, confirmed the title and ownership, was smoothly transferred. Federal authorities had confiscated the vehicle due to a statute. An enforcement officer is being investigated for financial crimes and misconduct. Julian was unaware at the time that the officer was Sergeant Grant Tolbert on the side of a Georgia highway. The same man is now accusing him of stealing. Sergeant Tolbert was not your typical beat the policeman. He had previously worked in internal investigations, a role often assigned to individuals deemed by Thebbook. However, allegations of unreported incidents, poorly handled corruption investigations, and mysterious financial flows have cast a shadow his professional life. After too many warning signs, he was eventually discreetly transferred to patrol work, a seeming downgrade cloaked in silence. His pride had suffered, his wallet had too. Additionally, when his valuable vehicle vanished from the impound more quickly than he has anticipated, he believed the issue had been forgotten and buried. As Julian stood outside the automobile today, with his hands visible and his spine straight, the like Georgia heat, the weight of injustice crushed down. Grant went around the car. Once more, as though seeking any excuse to escalate. His voice changed from personal to procedural. This automobile isn't something for guys, similar to what they typically obtain. Not until you were handed it. Julian did fall for the ruse. He presented facts without opposition. The title is in my name, sir. Clear by. Feel free to scan the window sticker's QR code. That is where I keep my DMV verification. Grant disregarded. His voice was strained as he radioed dispatch, requesting a backup. 1066 perhaps. A suspicious car might have been stolen or linked to earlier police gear. Julian blinked. Worried? His voice was steady yet icy as he asked softly, "You're reporting an automobile for being linked to you?" Grant winced. The words struck like a dart, as he had secretly seen the registration details. He simply refused to accept it. After a few minutes, another police car pulled up. Younger and more bookish Officer Bailey emerged. With wary interest. She asked for an update as she looked between the two men, one of whom seemed furious and the other unfazed. Grant provided a hazy synopsis that left out important details. Julian simply and unfazedly handed over the official DOJ auction stamp on the printed title, matching ID, and bill of sale. Bailey looked at them. Her brows knitted, then lifted in silence. She remarked, "Everything looks clean. In fact, flawless." Grant, however, was refusing to let go. Leaning toward Bailey, something was murmured out of earshot. Uncertain, she looked at Julian again before turning back to the papers. Grant indicated the trunk with a gesture. "We must search it," he stated. "Probable cause?" Bailey paused. "On what basis?" He didn't really respond. Julian was aware of his rights. He was aware of the law, but he also understood the consequences of refusing a search. Particularly when emotions took precedence over etiquette and it was captured on tape. I want this entire interaction to be recorded, but I can search," he stated. "I desire responsibility." At this point, a small crowd had assembled. Neighbors, onlookers, and individuals leaving surrounding establishments. Numerous phones were held up, silently recording. "That's Julian Mercer," a woman murmured. "He assisted in repairing Fee District's school servers from the previous year. He's a decent man, but Julian's image wasn't favorable." "Not quite yet." Within Theckups discovered exactly what was supposed to be in the trunk. A gym bag, jumper cables, tire iron, first aid kit, and Julian's briefcase for the presentation. No surprises, no weapons, no contraband. However, they discovered a thick government packet labeled DOJ Internal Asset Tracking Log. Concealed within the briefcase. 382K is the case file number. Grant stopped. That case number seemed familiar. To him, months prior, he had read it in the final report that described how several policemen, including himself, had been suspended. From mishandled assets during well-publicized busts. Although he hadn't been specifically named, he had always thought the case remained open. It was now in the man's hands, and he had just attempted to tune the side of the road, humiliate. Julian, however, remained silent. He just anything else. "You want to search for, Sergeant?" Grant inquired, looking him in the eyes as his hands twitched. The way people breathed altered. He did not appear to be the man in charge for the first time. He appeared to be cornered. He turned to Bailey. "Call this in," he subtly stated. "He's a plant." Bailey paused. "For what purpose is a plant used?" "For him," Julian responded. "For integrity, perhaps." Officer Bailey did not answer. Immediately. She kept her hand close to her radio but did not hit the button. There was something in Julian's tone that she paused because it was hostile, not defensive, but just blazingly clear. "What do you imply a plant?" She inquired once more slowly this time, her eyes squinting at Grant. Julian remained silent, not in words. Rather, he took a cautious step back, approached his vehicle, carefully opened the driver's side door, and pulled a tiny laptop bag out. He unzipped it to see a surface issued by the government. Tablet, opened a protected document and slid it across the hood. Bailey and both Grants moved forward. A sealed communication chain from the department was shining on the screen. DOJOCR. The Office of Civil Rights Oversight, timestamp 2. Weeks prior. Active Field Audit, Incident Response, and Law Enforcement Conduct Monitoring was the subject. Line, @TL, Grant's mouth clenched. Bailey now gave him a distrustful glance, although almost suspiciously. She inquired, "You're on an audit list?" Julian mutely. Julian's response was, "I'm on the team." Instead of boasting, hadn't raised his voice because the reality was more painful than indignation ever could. This was not merely a stop-and-go situation. Rather, it was the beginning of an iceberg, one where police misbehavior, power abuse, and racial profiling were being surreptitiously monitored by the same technology that officers such as Grant believed they could control. Julian Mercer was the embedded observer, not just any old driver. Grant attempted to dismiss it, saying, "So what? They let it guys run operations now." However, Bailey remained motionless, examining Julian's face, the open file, and Grant again. "Do you know how it appears if you reported a clean automobile that was registered to you when he was here with OCR?" "Oh," Grant's the voice broke. "You ran his plates?" she added bluntly. "He's setting me up." "You escalated after pulling him over, searched without a warrant. So tell me who is manipulating whom?" The crowd had expanded not in volume but rather in presence, with phones recording. Tension hovered like static electricity, and voices were murmuring. Julian had seen 2 distinct Facebook Live badges on phones, and the entire exchange was now being streamed. He didn't have to speak. There were at least 4 camera angles in the throng. One of the young men in the crowd whispered, "This is the type of body cam film they attempt to bury." "No, this dude is the body cam," said another. "Bailey stepped sergeant, I'm going to advise you to step back and let me handle the scene from here," Grant said, putting his hands on her belt. "Not today," she said. "Not in front of all these people," blazed. "I outrank you." "Not in terms of civil rights, investigations underway," Grant said, taking a bodily step back, but mentally he was coming apart. He observed Julian returning to the driver's seat with composure and opening a second compartment beneath the console, taking out a credential that was laminated and enclosed in a protective envelope. Wasn't an official badge. Rather, it was a field verification card of the type issued. It didn't require an embedded oversight liaison to work closely with the Doge. There were no dramatic revelations or flashing lights. It simply sat there, indisputable, time-stamped, documented, and solid. For the officers and onlookers alike, the atmosphere shifted. For the parents of kids like Julian, for all those who had ever inquired, for the educators who understood what it meant to be accused first and heard second, what would happen if I wasn't filming? Grant moved forward once more, sounding a little louder now, as though desperate override the facts. "Why didn't you reveal your identity right away?" Julian at last gave him a direct look, because that's not how things work. "My job isn't me duty is to see how you act when you think no one is looking. To make your day easier." Bailey lowered her sight. The revelation about the department as a whole, not just what they meant for Grant, made the term hurt. Entire. How many previous stops had gone similarly, with no camera among the crowd, no folder in the trunk, and no one on the Unit 14, status check, dispatch crackled on her radio. "Inside?" She replied. Swiftly, 10 to 26 standing by asking for an on-site supervisor. "We have a Doge presence confirmed." Again, supervision presence confirmed. There was a protracted Julian stood when the speaker came back clearly, saying, "Supervisor, en route, advise all units." Silently, hands by his sides, motionless, not arrogant, not triumphant. Having witnessed it in a dozen previous encounters, he was aware of what was about to happen. A dozen other policemen who'd went too far because they didn't think accountability was strong enough. They believed that body cam footage could be removed, that civil rights grievances were ignored, and that a man such as he was incapable of surpassing a badge. Grant was also mistaken. Half an hour later, a black SUV with tinted windows came up. A woman wearing a navy jacket emerged, composed and at ease. She introduced herself to Bailey and then to Julian, holding the tablet didn single quotes to talk to Grant at all because she didn't have to. As she started looking through the video, Bailey discreetly drew Julian away from his tablet while synchronizing timestamps with patrol dash cams. "Why go through everything? You could have just stated who you were right away," she added. Julian gave her a look, his look unreadable. "You wouldn't have spoken in such a manner, and if I had, none of this would have been true." Bailey nodded slowly. "You talked." "He most certainly wouldn't have, and I wouldn't have gotten the footage I needed," with respect but admiration on her face. Grant sat on the curb a few feet away. The moment's weight had settled, and he was kneeling with his elbows and holding his head in his hands. There was only the soft sound of a system at last turning. No shouting or violence, because it's fierce when authority is misused in silence, but when the truth is spoken tape, it spreads after justice has faded. By the time the internal affairs SUV the street was clear when it rolled away, but the fallout had only just started. What had begun as a traffic check but has already evolved into a high-stakes revelation of racial profiling, systemic problems, and civil rights abuses, accountability, and something much more profound. What occurs when those who have vowed to defend the system believe they are above it? Julian didn't return home that night. Instead, he handed over all of the recordings, timestamps, and information from the encounter in a federal building. Downtown had not only documented Grant's behavior, but also the intent, the tone, and language, and worst of all, the officer's realization that the car he attempted to accuse someone else of stealing something was once his own. What transpired over the next 72 hours would turn a local case around. But the footage screamed louder than any report ever could. Turned into a national headline. A 37-second clip, the caption, "Cop pulls over black driver, then realizes it's his car," was posted by a bystander. DOJ was involved. It reached 1.2 million views in a single day. The film featured Julian, serene, and Grant is motionless and protective, and the screen freezes as soon as he looks at it. The look when you realize the system you abused just logged in is the caption for the photo taken at the registration. In the morning, by noon, national media carried the news after local sites picked it up. CNN, it had portions on MSNBC, and even Fox that discussed more than simply Sergeant Grant's actions, Tolbert. But the most important query is, how many stops like this occur without a camera or Julian? The department convened a press briefing amid the media frenzy, although they acknowledged a continuing internality and said that the department's standards will be used to judge officer conduct, but Julian had already seen fit playbook. Stealthy. Reassignments, brief suspensions, and ambiguous remarks that was insufficient. So he followed his training and submitted a formal federal case against the department's traffic stop review process as a whole, not only against Grant protocols, pointing to instances of wrongdoing, a lack of openness, and inaction. This was about a broken society, not just one cop anymore. Later that week, Grant made an appearance on Asympathetic DJ, attempting to recast the story on a small M radio show. Asserted that Julian had refused to reveal his identity and that he felt frightened, and that everything was a misinterpretation of the situation, but he was at the mercy of context. The video, clean, unaltered, time-stamped, and conveyed a distinct narrative. It displayed no dangers, no violence, simply a man acting like a suspect while remaining composed, systematic, and completely law-abiding. That same Julian's function was clarified in a statement issued by DOJ officials that day, and Mr. Mercer was given permission to perform live oversight operations in coordination with government review teams. He was not only legally present, but purposefully so, at the exact moment. A second video, this one from Grant's own body, was leaked when the authorities believed they could manage the fallout. Was acquired when a civil rights journalist submitted a FOIA request. Before the stop, Grant was seen in the video in his cruiser. When he spotted Julian's vehicle, muttering, "That looks like my old ride," he narrows his eyes. What on earth did he get that? Then talk louder into the microphone. Play check. He had no probable cause. Let's check if he has any prior. No broken tail light. Expired tag. It was just car profiling and worse revenge for a vehicle he thought was still his. The leak went viral. Trended. DOJ justice damaged a car. Stop. Grant was caught implementing. Police reform. As the pressure increased, debates erupted on talk shows. Some said that Julian set a trap and was baiting the police. Noted that if the stop had proceeded normally, with no witnesses and no video, Julian might have been jailed worse. This is not a setup, one civil rights lawyer who appeared on news panels remarked. Julian's inbox was overflowing with messages that said, "This is a stress test of police conduct, and this officer failed." Letters from pastors, teachers, soldiers, college students, and even former police officers applauding him for expressing the truth, remaining composed and refusing to let it go. However, some communications were nasty, including doxing attempts and threats. Online mobs are Julian had anticipated that he would accuse him of being anti-police. Was a part of his life, but it was personal this time. An emergency was brought on by the incident. Hundreds attended the City Hall event. Julian remained silent, but the room was full with people, including parents who stood up to share stories of their sons being stopped for having tinted windows. Driving when black, or fitting a nebulous description. Teachers described the training they had to undergo. A former judge stood and remarked, "This is the first time that they have taught their students how to stay alive during traffic stops. It's the first accountability case I've seen in years." The council decided to suggest an outside federal audit of the whole department. The mayor apologized in public, but Grant was put on administrative leave in order to maintain his dignity while acknowledging his failure, without paying for the results of several inquiries. Julian went back to he worked at a STEM center, where teens sat in a circle and watched the now viral video on a projector. At first, nobody said anything, but then a 14-year-old inquired, Did you know that would occur?" "I didn't know it'd be him," replied Julian, taking a deep breath. "But I knew something would occur. I didn't record in order to apprehend anybody. To preserve the truth, I recorded. Since without people forget proof, they revise it. They claim that you appeared hostile or unclear, but given evidence, it speaks for itself. Were you afraid?" Inquired another pupil. Julian gave an honest response, saying, "Yes, but I was more terrified of the consequences if I didn't do it." After public indignation and Julian's official complaint, the bias policing was the subject of a pattern, or practice inquiry conducted by the Department of Justice. Julian was asked to give findings regarding improper asset seizure procedures and traffic stop misuse. He gave in a 6-page report that included information, video, and officer observations on other incidents he had surreptitiously seen in addition to Grant. Red flags, misconduct files, and histories are hidden in bureaucracy. What they found was concerning. Black drivers were more likely to have their luxury cars flagged by multiple authorities, and stops were lengthier, more hostile searches, and patronizing behavior. The most alarming discovery is that more than 70% of eventually such stops resulted in no charges, arrests, or citations, merely humiliation. The DOJ's conclusions supported the decades-long statements made by communities. Another cop came forward anonymously 2 weeks later, providing text exchanges between Grant and a coworker, messages from months ago saying he would return his ride if he ever saw it again on the road. "If some man I'm cuffing first," asking later, the messages were provided as proof of the wrongdoing. "Rolls up in my Audi." Since the matter was now closed, the department was forced to move on with the termination process. In opposition to Grant Tolbert and other internal policy changes made to every patrol unit, the system didn't fall apart at the conclusion of the climax. Instead, it started to right itself, not by taking revenge, but via transparency, honesty, and silent resistance supported by unwavering documents. Julian Mercer documented. He complied. He didn't shout or retaliate. Endured, and as a result, whole city was compelled to face the profound ways in which injustice may be concealed under everyday life, silently, frame by frame. The storm arrived without sirens. Frame the department believed they could withstand the storm, since they had witnessed news cycles that for a few days it blazed brightly before fading away in the mist of distraction. This time, however, it wasn't fading because Julian didn't leave. Entered, although the general public was unaware of it at the time. Julian was more than a tech specialist who had been brought on board for paperwork. He participated in a DOJ pilot program that was surreptitiously introduced with the goal of embedding trained oversight agents in actual police encounters to watch and gather civil rights transgressions and examine prejudice trends in the sector. Julian, however, wasn't Thebacup. He was the primary analyst and had been identifying police and evaluating misconduct files for months, buried in redacted data. Grant Tolbert's name had surfaced twice in various Southeast departments. Shielded by pending review statuses and ambiguous disciplinary regulations. That Audi was confiscated as part of an asset forfeiture and had been marked as suspicious. In the DOJ system, but Julian was the one who discovered Tolbert was the source. The disparity in the speed at which it disappeared from internal records. The car was more than just a means of mobility. Was a breadcrumb, a lingering hint in a case that had been ignored. Julian decided to take action and filed for legal possession of the car, not only as a civilian purchaser but also as a tactic. And when Grant stopped him, it seemed as though the last component had been pushed in by the one individual who was so conceited that he thought he would never be held responsible. Julian spent the following 10 days compiling what the DOJ called a clean grid, body cam, time-stamped radio logs, and an entire digital timeline film, social media, officer duty history, and audio transcription meta, delays in dispatch responses, overlays of citizen videos, and possibly the biggest crucially, heat maps of traffic stops throughout the district that show racial disparities, while each component alone could be dismissed as a mistake. When together, they depicted a harsh reality. Julian had been halted due to his race because someone didn't want to think a black man should be operating a vehicle that had previously been operated by a white police officer. The DOJ assigned a legal team to draft a civil lawsuit because Julian's conclusions were so thoroughly documented. Examination of rights under 34 U.S.C. Section 12601. A practice or pattern investigation that enables the federal government to step in when police forces exhibit systemic misbehavior. A week later, the mayor received a letter from the U.S. Department of a formal inquiry into the East Clayton Police Department is being launched by Justice with an emphasis on patterns, alleging violations of the 4th and 14th Amendments, racial discrimination, and unjustified car stops. Grant's legal team, meantime, made an effort to counterattack, bringing up allegations of emotional trauma, mental stress, and they attempted to portray Julian as an aggressor, claiming he had lured the encounter to stir up controversy. But that defense was unsuccessful in court due to Julian never once reached out, never once raised his voice, and never once said no. He just allowed the law to do what it rarely does in these situations, which is to tell the truth with the camera, evidence, rather than indignation. Although the trial was private, the documents swear Grant was convicted of starting an illegal stop, breaking departmental policies, and making fraudulent claims in a formal report. According to internal correspondence, he had attempted to. His pension was suspended pending additional inquiry, his badge was taken away, and important material was redacted. And Grant remained mute when asked if he had anything to say prior to final sentencing in a chilly, somber courtroom, because it was his quiet and not Julian's. For the first time, Julian's analysis revealed 10 additional police, with traffic stop records that mirrored the first officer's results. The same trends, erroneous searches, prejudiced wording, and needless stops. 78 black drivers were searched by one cop, but no one was ever arrested, and only gave out 4 tickets. Another had targeted out-of-count plates that were driven by minority drivers close to upscale retail malls. DOJ mandated retraining programs. But Julian went one step farther and suggested a brand new electronic surveillance system. His team created an AI-based auditing tool that identified racial irregularities, examined patrol logs in real time, duration, the results of the stops, and the alerted oversight panels. The agency was forced to put it into effect. By doing this, they ceded accountability as well as control over the data, initially opposed. The local police union eventually gave in to public pressure and the threat of lawsuits, because this was about surviving in a system that no longer cared about politics. No one was going to justify them anymore. 2 months later, the city passed the law change known as the Mercer Clause, mandated that body cam footage be made public within 14 days of any contested incident. Civilian supervision during force reviews, quarterly required racial bias audits, and a prohibition on cops working active duty within 100 days following a prolonged complaint. Julian made no requests for recognition for his name to appear on the memorial. However, the municipal council observed a moment of silence following the vote, not in remembrance, but in deference. Deference to a man who didn't yell or take offense, but instead recorded, exposed, then changed his ways. Julian has already made 2 viral appearances, invitations to college panels, think pieces, and interviews, but he turned down the most of them since he wasn't seeking notoriety, creating something enduring. Julian went back to the same place the day after Grant's last appeal was rejected, intersection where it all started. This time, instead of a camera, they had a clipboard, a few folding seats, and a banner. Free legal advice, a course on documentation, and information about your rights off. People arrived, including retired instructors, mothers with worries, young guys with inquiries, and a few off-Dutton teen questioned, "How do I stop them?" As officers stood the edge observing but not taking action, from making a profile of me. "You can expose it, but you can't always stop it," Julian remarked, meeting his gaze. "You are able to note it down, you'll outlive it. And don't when you do, simply upload the video. Sabbath documentation, arrive, raise your voice, we win that way. One vehicle, one case, and one form right at a time." This was the tale of fact. Not of a badge being displayed to conclude a traffic check, eternal strength of one man's silence, which is employed as a tactic rather than as a sign of submission. Julian Mercer didn't pull rank. Instead, he used the very system designed to overlook him to observe him. The headlines faded as the curtain was pulled aside, allowing the system to see itself. As usual, new controversies replaced them. But something had changed, silently, forever, in East Clayton. Not because a guy shouted, not because a man named Julian Mercer refused to give up, even after someone retaliated with fists, redefining what it meant to react to an unlawful stop. He did more than just survive one. With planning, with clarity, and with the unwavering self-control that our nation all too frequently expects of black males in despot provocation. Months went by, and the streets remained the same. Patrol cars continued to roll slowly past corner stores, and trees continued to lean across crumbling pavements. They now moved differently, being mindful, cautious, and using body cams that were no longer accidentally turned off, and improved monitoring procedures made it apparent that you never know who's recording. You never know who might be listening. Julian didn't start a podcast, become famous, or compose an autobiography. He achieved this by going back to the same community center each Saturday and sitting across from children who they shouldn't have to ask, "Mr. Mercer, what will I do if they lie to me?" You look like him, answering questions, you talk clearly, you document, you file the report, you don't panic. He would add, "Hold fast to the truth because well-written truths don't crumble." His Talibecum, a case study, cited in DOJ training programs, and utilized by law schools. The video was distributed to officers in other agencies as a lesson that just because you police the law doesn't mean you're above it. But for Julian, neither press nor federal reform represented the true triumph. Conferences, you see. That was the message he left behind in his post-day travels around the world. In a different scenario, he would have been pummeled, handcuffed, or worse, left mute after a traffic check that may have destroyed him forever. This is the reason the result is so potent. Not only because justice was fulfilled, but Julian had anticipated injustice and responded to it with unquestionable truth. In doing so, he imparted to the country a lesson that we frequently overlook. Instead of shouting or flashing a badge, authority only needs to remain motionless and fearless when even though the world expects it to fail, he continues to drive. his car not out of resentment, but due to the fact that each time he gets inside, fastens his seatbelt, and turns on the motor. It serves as a reminder and a sign that what used to silence him is now what keeps him going. Later that year, at a scholarship gala, Julian gave a brief speech, a single sentence, no notes, and no indications of applause. He merely stated, "He was the one who got lost, not me. They pulled me over thinking I didn't belong." The nice type of silence, the kind that occurs when a room fully understands the story they just told, fell upon the stage. It was about power, not an automobile, a police officer, or even a traffic stop. The ease with which it may be misused and the beauty with which it can be regained when one chooses truth over ego and justice above anger. Keep in mind this if you've ever been ignored, singled out, or rejected. The narrative of Julian. Keep in mind that quiet isn't necessarily a sign of surrender. Sometimes it's the silence prior to the revelation of the truth, and when it does, even those who cling for what people don't see, the badge may have to answer.